He is a professor at Rutgers School of Social Work and owns a private practice in South Jersey where he works with men to overcome issues of masculinity and development of a sense of self. Welcome, Dr. Hanna.
Thank you, Dr. Marsh. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. How are you?
I'm doing very good.
So you're here today to talk about CBT and maybe some of CBT-like modalities as well. So, after you.
Okay. So CBT, one of the big things about CBT is that CBT steals a lot from every other therapy. So a lot of times CBT is for different types of therapies that are going on. However, they're taking pieces of other theories. CBT, one of the fundamental concepts of CBT is that we have three parts of our mind and behavior. So we have a thought, we have a feeling, and we have a behavior. And CBT is interesting because they use the thought aspect as that is the piece that changes, which will change feelings, and then will change behaviors. Okay? The issue, and this is why I use a different form of cognitive behavioral theory, is that it's linear in base, right? You always concentrate on the thought, and then the feeling and the behavior come after the thought. So with CBT, it's the gold seal for practice. Mm-hmm. Part of the reason it's the gold seal for practice is because it numbers and you do scaling and you do different numbers, and that works well for insurance companies doing well. However, basic CBT a lot of times will not work, especially with men, because when you're working just trying to change their thoughts, part of the problem that they have is they have problems explaining what emotions are. They don't have that type of language to understand that there's feelings besides angry or pissed, right? Mm-hmm. So men typically have this idea that you have to either be happy or pissed. And if you're not one of those, then you're completely lost.
Right.
So part of the cognitive behavioral therapy would start you upset. What makes you this? And men on a lot of times will be like, I'm not upset, I'm fine. A CBT piece where it's just a very linear causality causes some issues.
Sure.
That's why I started doing rational emotive behavioral therapy, which is ReBT. Mm-hmm. It was actually a predecessor to CBT in general, and it was done by Albert Ellis. And so with that one, it was before CBT. So instead of doing a linear causality, it said that we have our activating events, which are triggers. We have our belief systems, which could be either rational or irrational. And then we have consequences. So it said that activating event does not cause a consequence. However, the activating event plus a behavior started the consequence. Start learning about what those underlying beliefs are. We can start understanding why those behaviors are there. So with CBT, the main focus of your class today, it's saying CBT has a very interesting take on what feelings are. Mm-hmm. So with CBT, it says that feelings can be one of very few things. You can be mad, sad, scared, or glad. Those are the only ones that you can have. Okay? Mm-hmm. Anything else is a thought, because I feel anxious doesn't mean that it's a feeling. Anxiety then is a thought pattern, and the feeling that would be associated might be scared, it might be mad, right? But right. You have to delineate from that. However, when you try to do this with clients, it's very tough to get them to get that concept that those are the only feelings that I'm allowed, right? And so usually it's trying to break those down, and it's trying to identify, what are the feelings that a person's having. It's different because it goes over the feelings first instead of the cognitions.
Yeah, and Dr. Singer in the podcast that they listened to this week talks about ReBT and the differences and the schools of thought that both came from. Mm-hmm. So I'm glad that you're bringing that up too.
Yeah, so ReBT was actually predecessor to CBT. Mm-hmm. And then CBT just recently started adding aspects of ReBT into it, because lately they're using the ABC model, the activating event sequence, with their trying to deal with combat trauma with others. Okay, so they just started taking on some of those traits of ReBT. As I said, CBT likes to steal everything. And so there is a very distinct difference, though, between the two, right? Because part of CBT is that linear, and that it always has to start with that thought. And if we can break down the thought, then we can break down, what's going on with the person, and we have very specific ways that we like to, distort our thoughts. So there are some thought distortions that are very common. So we have in CBT, it would be like filtering is one, right? Whereas in ReBT, it would be awfulizing. Right, so there's different names to them, but thought distortion aspects to it. So the filtering technique of CBT, one of the ways I like to explain it to my clients is that we like to filter things out that we don't believe, right, and to filter things in that we do believe. Right. So if anybody has ever bought a brand new car, right, all of a sudden you're on the road and you see that car everywhere. So what we're doing is we're actually filtering to make sure that the car that we want to buy is a reliable car. So we see a ton of them on the road in order to then fulfill our need for a car that's reliable.
Sure.
Okay? So we have that filtering technique. And then we have the maximizing and minimizing, right? And maximizing and minimizing becomes a strong defense within people, right? You tell a person a compliment, oh, you're just saying that. But you say something that might be negative to the person, oh, I knew it. That's how it is, right? So for there's different examples of that. But the one that I think is really pertinent to understand is the way that we distort our reality in general. So we are typically looking for things that confirm either in CBT what they would call a core belief, right? And in ReBT, what you would call a core belief system. And so the one that we use the most, and we don't have any proof, we like to have proof that we're right. Nobody really okay? So the one that we utilize is called mind reading. And so what mind reading says is that even if nobody's saying what I want to hear is right? Nobody's saying it, I know they're thinking it, right?
Sure, even if it's negative, correct?
Even if most of the time the mind reading is about negativity, right? Because we judge ourselves more so than we do anything else as human beings.
Sure.
And so part of when I'm working with men, past judging themselves for not being manly enough. Right? And so that judgment factor is really a key. And so, like, a man will sit there and say, like, I can't cry. And I'm like, why? And he goes, other people will see me as weak. I'm like, you're mind reading, right? That's not the case. People will see you as strong if you cry. But they automatically assume what other people are going to be thinking.
Sure.
Okay. So that's the one I find myself working with a lot, is this belief that people have to be a certain type of way.
And that's based on the cultural belief, like, depending on where you're at and your environment in general.
Yes. And so, with cognitive behavioral therapy, it does fit into complex systems theory. It fits into the environment and social learning, because we learn how to do all these things.
Sure.
Right? And we learn our defense mechanisms.
Absolutely.
And so some of the things that, like, I work with men is, as I said before, emotion does not mean weakness. I identify it's okay to be who you are, and it's okay to voice how you feel, but in appropriate ways that really mask, like, what's underneath of the rage. Is it anger? Because anger is the motivator.
Right.
We become angry in your class right now might have been like, I am sick and tired of the job I'm at right now. I need to go back to school, right? And so that drives us. So those feelings then start driving us. And that's part of the reasons that they're under feelings and not under thoughts. So the idea that a person needs to be a provider, a person needs to make more money, a person needs to, it can go on and on, the list of what men are supposed to do.
Sure.
But it's all a social structure.
Mm-hmm.
It's a societal pressure. And what they've started realizing is that with men in general, it was thought that men had higher suicide rates because of the method of which they do try to commit suicide.
Sure.
But the research has shown that actually men have higher suicide rates because of their need to fit into societal labels. So when we have something like an economic crisis and men lose their jobs and they can't provide for their families, the suicide rate in men increases and skyrockets.
Right. Interesting, yeah, because I've always heard that it was because they chose lethal ways to do it. Interesting. Well, thank you for that. Great.
Okay. So the behavior piece, right? We have to figure out what is the behavior that we want people to do, right? And so a lot of times we'll figure out what the positive behavior is and negative behavior, and we'll reinforce what we believe. But we have to really look at the person themselves and say, what is the behavior that you're looking for, right?
Yeah.
Well, I want people to know how I feel. Okay, do you want people to just see you mad, or do you want people to know what you're thinking and how you're feeling? Right. So, but you have to get the person to buy into the behavior that you're looking for. Because if the person doesn't buy into it, they're not going to change their thoughts.
Exactly. So it needs to be their idea in a way. So they have to come up with what they want their change to be.
Yes. Great. And so part of what I like about Albert Ellis is the background noise that he talks about. He called it background tapes. For the younger people in the class, they don't know exactly what tapes are, but it's a recording that goes on that we start recording. And his philosophy was that we start developing our core sense of self when we're in 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade. Okay, and that's where we're in. If we think about Piaget, right, we're in the concrete operational stage. Right, so everything becomes very concrete. All of a sudden, the world isn't magical anymore. Your parents have lied to you about this magical being coming in and giving you presents or getting money for teeth. And so what happens is that a child will get hit with a reality. And then at that time, they can't think in these formal ways. So they start developing these thought patterns of either I'm lovable or I'm unlovable. I'm worthy or I'm unworthy. Right? All these versus statements, right? And then they put that into their core belief system. That becomes who they are.
Sure.
And so part of the issue is that the other piece is that this is when bullying picks up in school, because the social network actually becomes more influential than the family aspect of things. Right. Because at this point, in concrete operational point, we can start saying, well, my parents lied to me about everything else, that I'm a good-looking person, or why would they not lie that I'm do good or I'm an achiever, right? So all of a sudden, it becomes this internalized stuff. Now, when we start growing up and we start having those formal operational thoughts, we can sit there and make overwhelming statements of like, well, everybody's lovable, right? And I can rationalize things, and I can do all these different things to get a person to understand, like, yeah, I'm lovable. Every human's lovable, so that means that I'm lovable. However, that might not be their belief system, right? And so what the background tape then says to the person is it's saying, you're not a worthy person, you're not lovable, and that's all in the background. And as that goes on in the background, we don't hear it until something kicks in and identifies, like, wow, that's my belief. That activating event hit a belief system, which then says, that's right, I'm not good enough. And that causes internal struggle for a person.
Right.
And so when they have that internal struggle, that's when they typically come in. And that's why you want to kind of see what their thought is. However, it's hard because they start believing that their thought is just, it's rationally away. Like, I don't care. It doesn't matter. Everybody's lovable, So it's kind of really finding where